Welcome to The Age Guide, the podcast where we give voice to older adults and caregivers, challenge ageism, and offer guidance to help you thrive on the journey ahead. I'm Gretchen Knowlton, your host, exploring the policies and ideas transforming the aging experience. This season, we're diving into what it really means to age well, from staying connected and keeping our minds sharp to finding our passion and building more age-inclusive communities. Today, I'm joined by Ken Stern, nationally recognized expert on longevity and founder of the Longevity Project. He's host of the podcast Century Lives, author of the newsletter 3 Not So Bad Things on Aging on Longevity, and author of a new book, Healthy to 100, where he challenges the way we think about the second half of life.
Hi, Gretchen.
Hi, Ken. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on the podcast.
So excited to have you here today to kick off a new season that we are doing on aging well, and you're the perfect person to have as a guest today. So thanks for being here.
You bet. Excited to be here.
So today I have some questions for you. You've had an interesting and illustrious career from law to politics and media. How did you end up working on longevity?
That is a great question, Gretchen. It was sort of two things. One is I started getting older. So I started, I think longevity is for everyone, but those of us who've hit 50s and now 60s, for me, I think have a particular interest in how we might age better. At least that, for me, I became much more interested in the topic as I turned, the clock turned into the 50s. And the second thing that got me focused on this was a conversation I had with a professor at Stanford by the name of Laura Carstensen, who is the founding director of something called the Stanford Center on Longevity, who I've partnered with for the last 7 years. And Laura, I had a conversation with her, and it really, I thought it was going to be an interesting conversation, but not necessarily lead somewhere particular. And I want to talk to her about aging, which I understood at the time to be, what do we do with all these old people? And she wanted to talk to me about longevity, which was how do we rethink the life course, really from birth on, so that our longer lives can be optimized for health, wellness, well-being, productivity, and meaning. And I thought that was, sometimes you just have those aha moments. This is the aha moments was Laura telling me what to think. And it really opened up a new world for me that got me interested in lots of topics that led to the creation of the Longevity Project, this podcast, and now my new book, Healthy to 100.
So she set you up to stay busy for a long time, which is
Really
perfect.
did. I owe Laura a lot, yeah.
Really turned the conversation around from this being a problem to this being an opportunity for all of us.
Exactly right.
Perfect. So you've been leading the Longevity Project, which I understand is in collaboration with the Stanford Center on Longevity, and you foster public conversations about the impact of these longer lives on civil society. But your latest book, which was just released, which I happen to have a copy of it here, and you can see I've tabbed it up. It was so interesting, loved it, and we'll share a link to it in the show notes. But this book, which was just released, Healthy to 100, it seems to flip the script just like you are talking about. And it focuses on what contributions of these longer lives give our society. What spurred you to focus on practices that lead to these longer lives?
So again, it ultimately traces back to Laura, but only indirectly in this case. So I host the podcast Century Lives. It's actually from the Stanford Center on Longevity, although I host it and my team produces it.
Okay.
And we take on, it's an unusual podcast. It's essentially a documentary podcast. So it's a lot of field reporting, and each season takes on sort of a big issue that's related to aging and longevity. So for instance, our next season is focused on housing and how are we going to house 85 million people over the age of 65. A fascinating and difficult subject. But one season we did probably about 2 years now was focused on outliers, looking at following up on research that Raj Chetty at Harvard has done about the relationship between county level income and county level life expectancy, which are highly, highly correlated. So our season was actually focused on some of the places that overachieve, do better than the underlying income data say they would. And everywhere we went for that season, the story was kind of the same. The reason that people did better was not because of exercise or nutrition or healthcare, is because they were leading socially connected, meaningful, purposeful lives in the second half of life, and how structure in those communities allowed them to do that. So in Presidio County, Texas, it was about strong intergenerational relationships between families and communities. In Co-op City in the Bronx, it was actually about housing and stability of housing and how that creates strong communities and more purposeful lives. And ultimately, that question about if those places succeeded in helping people foster people have more meaning in the second half of life, how could we do that? And how are other countries that are more successful in aging than we are doing that now?
Wow. Okay. So, just to clarify what you said about the outliers, it does seem like research really is tied to where you live has a huge impact on your longevity. And where you live, of course, is tied to your socioeconomic status, right? So you can almost predict from somebody's zip code how long they're going to live, which is unfortunate for those people who are in the lower bracket of socioeconomic status. But you did find some outliers where you're saying they were living longer despite what you would expect to find based on where they lived around the world.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
So it led me, that inquiry led me to think, we have a problem with social connection in this country. People are pulling apart. Technology is pulling us apart. We're more isolated. We're more lonely. We spend less time with other people. And it occurred to me, and that I think has led to what I call the American life expectancy disparity.
Mm.
We live a lot shorter than every other advanced economy, people in every other advanced economy in the world, often by 7 or 8 years. It led me to ask the question, you know, people in places like Japan or Italy or Singapore also have the same technology pressures we do. They have the same phones, the same television sets, all the things that have pulled them apart.
Yeah.
Why are they doing so much better? What is it? What is it about their cultural context? What is about their place that has made them much more successful in social connection and aging, especially in the second half of life? And that's really the what I set out to
Hmm.
find out for this.
Looking to find out. Now, when I first heard about the topic of your book, I immediately thought of the Blue Zones, and I'm sure you get that a lot. That
You
the
do.
book and the Netflix series by Dan Buettner about a group of long-lived communities around the world. And to be honest, the Blue Zones really stressed me out personally because I like to eat meat. I carry a lot of stress. I
Yeah.
don't walk up a mountainous pathway every day to get to work. But and that's kind of what he was finding in those blue zones are the things that were successful for healthy aging. But in the introduction to your book, you said this book is intended to be the antithesis of the blue zones because virtually everyone reading this book lives in a place completely unlike a traditional blue zone. And I found that to be an enormous relief. But then the whole book really provided so much hope because it feels more doable somehow to think about social connection. So, can you unpackage this a little bit? Why did you say Healthy to 100 is the antithesis of the Blue Zones? And can you explain how your approach differed from the Blue Zone Project?
Yeah. So there's a lot to like about it. So I should say I will criticize the blue zones, but there's a lot to like about it. And many of the things that Dan discovered about diet and social connection, especially, really dovetails well with research about what helps us have healthy lives. So let's say that's important. But the issue for me, especially when it came to social connection, what they do in Ikaria or in the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, the places he was describing were places in which people lived in that community, for generations. Everyone knew everyone else. That is not the lives we've inherited in our highly mobile, urbanized society. So it just, it was great that he found that social connection matters. That's clearly
Yeah.
right. but the lessons from it were not, to me, very transferable to how we live our
Right.
often transitory lives. So, and also I have no mountain path here in Washington, D.C. either. So I wanted to go to places that were much more like ours and say, look, these are highly stressful, often urbanized societies. They have the same stressors that we do here in the United States. They're not remote, unique kind of fountain of youth kind of places. They're the way we live our lives. What can we learn from those places that are actually transferable to our lives here? And that's why I wanted to do something that was, in my mind, had some of the same approaches to the blue zones, um, uh, uh, but was much more like the lives we lived, and much more the lessons could be much more transferable. The other challenge that Dan faced, and there's been a lot written about it. There's a researcher from Oxford named Saul Newman who has done a lot of research on the underlying data available in those places that Dan visited. And he's really challenged it because the record keeping and the pension fraud in those places are actually often quite high. So I wanted to go to places that actually had the benefit of much more established record keeping, much larger populations, where the possibility of fraud was
Okay.
much less. So that's the other thing that I wanted to make sure of. I'm not a data scientist, but I wanted to go to places where there was integrity of data that we could rely on.
Yeah. Okay. And you actually traveled around the world to all of these places.
I did. It's a fun job, right? So I spent months in Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Spain, and Italy. And it turns out that the places that people live a long time are also often good places to visit. So that was
Right. So the book read to me like part research, part travelogue, and part maybe sociology text as you described your travels around the world to some of these, like you said, beautiful and unique places from out of the way rural towns to large urban neighborhoods. Did anything surprise you about these healthiest communities that you visited?
yeah. So a lot of things surprised me, and let me tick off a few of them.
Sure.
Uh, one was, the countries are often quite different, and some of the lessons I took away from each place was different. But there were some unifying themes. One was a cultural consensus in all those places that the second half of life can be as valuable, meaningful, and rewarding as the first, and that the future of not only people's health but of society hinged on it. And that was a cultural consensus that's very different than what we have here in the United
Mhm.
States. So that was one thing that really matters. The second thing I would say is, I read about work in Japan and lifelong learning in Korea, and there were different emphases in different places. But one thing that actually, and this actually surprised me, connected all the places was either this explicit policy or the implicit cultural consensus that intergenerational relationships matter enormously to successful aging, and for successful aging of both the young and the old. And so at a time when technology and mobility seems to divide the generations, how can we bring the generations back together? And so, in places like Singapore, it's with a heavy hand, like you're not allowed to get your own apartment until, if you're not married, until you're 35. You have to stay with your family because the state owns the country owns all the housing. Um, uh, or it's in northern Italy, where they're getting rid of senior centers in favor of centers for all ages. Or in Japan, where they're working very hard to create intergenerational workforces that leverage the knowledge of both the young and the old. So there are lots of efforts across all these countries to really bring the generations together when modernity has tried to divide them.
So, how can we replicate that here? Can neighborhoods and public spaces be intentionally designed to promote those things if it's not already happening organically?
Sure. So I think it begins with a recognition, which we don't really have, that the generations fit together like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, and that's reflected our sort of culture. So I mean, I think there are things that you can see. I mean, the thing is, everything that I write about uh, overseas is actually done here in the United States, but just on a small, almost experimental scale. So it's
Okay.
really about people understanding this is the way to better health, better social connection. It can be replicated. So some of it is in urban design, like creating more walkable communities that bring people together in ways that car-based communities simply don't. Sometimes it's about thinking about what the older generation can bring. So, like one place I visited, it's not in the book because it happened after I came back. I went to a place called Gorham House in Maine, and it is a nursing home slash preschool. So you walk in the front door, it is a preschool of 25 kids ages 3 and 4. And then it's a nursing home of 150 older folks who get such joy and benefit and value from being with kids on a regular basis, which doesn't happen in most nursing homes. Nursing homes can be pretty tough environments. So having the kids parade through every Friday singing, songs is just a moment of joy in which can be otherwise a pretty difficult environment. And I love that. But the thing that actually happened at Gorham House that was the most meaningful for me was when the head of the preschool told me the story that the elementary school teachers in Gorham report to her that the kids who come through their preschool are the ones who are most empathetic to differences. So like when a kid in a wheelchair came to elementary school, most of the kids didn't know how to deal or interact with him. But the kids from the Gorham House preschool did, because they were familiar with wheelchairs. They were familiar with differences.
Awesome.
And it's just such a beautiful story,
Beauty
right?
of inclusion.
Yeah. And you get that if you unite the generations, and you don't if you don't.
That's very powerful. Love that. So I was hoping that you could read a passage to us from your book that talks a little bit about the reframe of how we think about retirement. And that was on page 86 to 87.
All right. And you'll stop me because I'm not sure where the end point is. I'll just keep reading until the end of the book if you don't stop me.
Sure.
Right. Despite the evidence, we continue to undervalue the connection between work and social health. We view retirement as a relief from work, a way to reduce stress in our lives. But that ignores the stress of loneliness and isolation that often comes with retirement, leading to sometimes dramatic and unpleasant consequences. As the US Surgeon General's report on the loneliness crisis put it, for people who are lonely and isolated, there is no return. They live in a state of constant stress to their physical detriment. You can see why retirement, with the almost invariable retreat from long-standing social networks, raises significant health challenges. Yet in popular lore, retirement, especially the first decade of it, is depicted as a time of health, vigor, and leisure, a time to regain personal equilibrium after the stress of work. Google what is retirement like, and you'll get inundated with images of happy couples, almost always couples, tracing hearts on the beach, enjoying beautiful views from matching Adirondack chairs, or riding tandem on jet skis or mopeds, arms stretched into the air with joy. Retirement is blissful, stress-free, and apparently involves just endless amounts of paired, unsafe transportation. The reality for most people is rather different. Narrowing social networks as people lose work connections, constrained financial situations, loss of purpose, and declining mobility as people find less and less reason to leave the house are all characteristics of even the early years of retirement. And reduced health often follows. Was that the end, or did you want me to keep going?
Perfect. That's perfect. Thank you. Thanks for reading that.
Yeah,
I listened to it in part on audiobook and read some of it in the book, so it's fun to see you reading it in person.
Yeah. It's one of my favorite passages, so thank you for having me read that.
It's a good one because it really is inspiring me, and hopefully this will be inspiring to others too. Like if we reframe retirement in our minds and we focus more on staying busy and finding that purpose instead of focusing on stepping aside or slowing down, I think we could see some real changes. So, how do you think our workplaces, our social interactions, our notions about what is a good job have to change?
So I took a lot of the lessons from my travels in Japan, which is both the longest lived society on earth and the society with the most highest percentage of older workers. Uh, and the interesting thing about it is that that reflects um, something called they call the principle of ikigai, and a belief that happiness comes from doing small things. And there's a strong belief that work is and being busy in retirement is really beneficial to health. And 80% of the older workers in Japan report that they do that for they work for their not for economic reasons, but for their own physical and cognitive well-being. So part of what I took away from is the importance of that cultural consensus. But the other thing was um, people who work past 65 in Japan don't work the same way they did before 65 and the same way we work. So Japan is famous for its high stress work, but they've essentially created two work worlds: one for traditional labor force ages of 18 to 64, and a second one for older workers, which is much more focused on part-time work, job sharing, use of assisted technology, and other things that really allow people to work on their own terms. There's a organization called the Silver Genzai Human Resource Organization that sort of has about 1 million older workers who sign up to work for them, and they only provide part-time jobs. They work with employers to provide part-time jobs because that's what older workers want. So the second lesson is it's really to provide an opportunity and get the value of these older workers. Companies are going to have to rethink their labor rules for an older workforce. Japan's there before us because companies know they need older workers. Just a fact of the demographics of the place. It's going to happen here too, and we need to get ready for that.
So, besides Japan, your book also highlights countries like Korea and Singapore who have made longevity a national project. And I was struck by the passage of the book that talks about how we tend to treat the symptoms of aging rather than preventing them in the first place. And some of these things are actually part of the work that we do at Age Guide through the Older Americans Act funds, things that are funded like Meals on Wheels and caregiver services and home modifications. And as you said, these are all valuable and necessary and they have their place. But how do you think we could start shifting our resources and our attention to more prevention things? We also do things like friendly visiting and
Mm.
evidence-based health promotion and social connections programming. But what would it take to really force, I would say, policymakers in the United States to prioritize social connection as a matter of public health infrastructure rather than a personal choice?
Yeah, great question. I'm not sure I have a great answer to that. What would force policymakers to do it? I think, though, this is an area in which I think politics is downstream of culture. Right?
Okay.
That until we, as I'll put myself in the group, older Americans, begun to think of social connection as being a public health policy, and the loneliness crisis as a public health threat, um, we're probably not going to get change from people who run programming and make policy.
Hmm.
Um, and I think, health is something that takes place outside the doctor's office. I mean, all the places I went to have, very good healthcare systems. But when they think about how do you age well, that's in the background. And the focus is on social connection, purpose, and giving people reasons to stay engaged and opportunities to stay engaged. Until we as citizens and all Americans begin to define that as important for ourselves, I think we're going to be um, at the mercy of our own devices. So the programs you described are important, incredibly valuable and necessary, but so are programs that help people as they age stay engaged, because then they'll need those programs less. And ultimately,
Hmm.
there's a economic efficiency to that hopefully is ultimately persuasive to policymakers and program
Hmm.
creators.
So it really gets back to what you were saying about the cultural consensus. We have to get people on board with this. Individuals ourselves have to start asking for this and pushing for this. and then hopefully policy will follow?
I think that's right. I think that's absolutely right. Um, uh, uh, we made some progress, I think, with the last Surgeon General in identifying that there's a loneliness crisis.
Yeah.
And I think the next step is to say loneliness is not your responsibility. Um, a lot of people ask me the question about, I'm an introvert. What do I, how do I be less lonely? I don't think it's about the reason we're more lonely than 50 years ago or 40 years ago or 30 years ago, 20 years ago. It's not because we have a lot more introverts. It's because the
Mm.
things, the institutions that brought us together have atrophied. And we need to create more programming and resources and opportunity for people, whether they're extroverts or introverts, to be in places to make friends and connections. And that's I think, the message that ultimately we need to say to each other and also and to the political decision makers.
So there's no personal sense of blame, but there are things that we can do as an individual if we're lonely, and now we kind of know what a good prescription is for that, and some of those things are outlined in your book.
They are, and it's interesting. They are. So I do. No one's going to snap their fingers and create social health infrastructure. So I hope it happens, but it will take time.
Hmm.
There's a lot all of us can do. And it's actually interesting, by the way, Gretchen, that you say prescription, because people, the medical community also knows that social connection matters. And there's actually something called social prescribing, mostly in the UK, where the doctors will actually write prescriptions for people to volunteer or be part of some type of community activity. And that's a really powerful notion, I think, that we all should take to heart.
Yeah. And I also really appreciated the way the book was laid out. And at the end of each chapter, you offer 3 tips on healthy aging related to that chapter's focus. So people could take a look at that and maybe even make some choices or set some goals for what things they were going to focus on and how they were going to think differently, and live their life maybe a little bit differently. Well, overall, what do you hope that readers will take away from this book?
So I would start with the notion uh, um, that the next 20, whatever your age is as important as the last 20. I mean, we've actually been told at some point in our lives that when you hit 60 or 65, it's your years get less valuable.
Mhm.
And that's just not true. We spend our lives planning the next 20 when we're graduating from college or high school, what we're going to do for the next 20, or when we're mid career, what are we going to do for the next 20? There is no reason that those of us who are 62, like me, or 65, or 57, or 71, shouldn't also be
Mhm.
thinking with the same care and dedication about how the next 20 are going to be valuable both themselves and to their communities. I think that's the most important thing, because there are just so many things out there. There are 1.2 million volunteer organizations in the United States. They need older people to help them run. There is opportunities for lifelong learning. Most states provide either free tuition or highly discounted tuition in their state universities to older people. I just don't think people over the age of 60 know that. The
Mhm.
opportunities are there, um, if people know about them and really plan for them.
Yeah, and you have to recognize how valuable those things are maybe before you would go out and pursue those things. So this book is really kind of laying out that roadmap, and I find that really helpful. So thank you so much for your work on this and for sharing it with the world, and thanks for joining us on this podcast.
Gretchen, thanks for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
It was fun. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for joining us on The Age Guide, where we explore the insights, experiences, and practical strategies that help us thrive as we age. To learn more about how Age Guide Northeastern Illinois is advocating for older adults and caregivers, visit us at ageguide.org or call our offices at 630-293-5990. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share to help others find us. Join us next month as we continue exploring what it means to age well.